If you can find your seats, we're going to go ahead and go live on YouTube. Hello. Did you say something? No, it's fine. Okay, we'll call this meeting to order. Let's go ahead and do a roll call here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. This is roll call for Friday, October 22nd, 2021. Senator Bouchard. Here. Senator French.
Here.
Senator Cost.
Here.
Senator Wasserberger. Representative Blackburn. Here. Representative Clausen. Here. Representative Fortner. Representative Heiner. Here. Representative Larson. Here. Representative Western.
Here.
Representative Worf.
Here.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Co-Chairman Eklund.
Here.
Chairman Boner.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and get started here. We have the Business Council up first. But just a reminder that we're going to be welcoming our newest House member here at 11 o'clock. So we'll be heading up to House Chamber for that. So that's a slight modification for the agenda. But we'll go ahead and talk about updates from the Business Council. I know that we've been focused on how the Business Council can better support agriculture. So we'll go ahead and hear from them first. So go ahead. We've got 3 people from the Business Council. Go ahead and look forward to hearing your testimony.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Boner and members of the committee. I appreciate your time today. My name is Josh Durrell. I'm the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. And with me today, I have Jill Tregemba, who's our agribusiness manager. And we have Josh Keefe, who is in our investments division. So in previous meetings, you've asked some good questions about how the Business Council is supporting agriculture in the state. And so we've got an example of that today that we'd like to talk through. I believe we've provided in the packet some information about the city of Torrington's application for a Business Ready Communities grant and loan for the M. Lazy Heart feed mill. So it's got, you all might recognize the silhouette on the cover of that. Maybe not. So you could take a look at that and we can talk through some of that as well. I also do know that we had some questions about the business relief program audits that were performed beginning in November of last year. So about a year ago and concluded at the beginning of July. And so then we wanted to also just give an overview of that briefly. And then I believe we're going to talk a little bit about industrial revenue bonds. So I think we're prepared to do all of those things today. And again, thank you for your time and looking forward to it. Looking forward to the questions. So if we take a step back and a few meetings ago, we talked a little bit about our strategy. And our strategy, as you'll probably recall, is to really add value to the core industries of Wyoming, and agriculture is what we would consider one of the big 3. So we've got natural resources or extraction, tourism, and agriculture. And by adding value to those core industries, we want to leverage that to activate new sectors. And one of the things that we always want to do is think about how do we do that in a way that's going to provide really long-term prosperity for Wyoming communities. And a project that came about, I believe it was at the end of 2020 is when we started working on this project. I'm sure that the city of Torrington and the Millers had been working on it more than that. But we began engaging with them at that time and putting together this application for a Business Ready Communities grant and loan. And this project was asking for $3 million in a grant and $3 million in a loan. And the intent was to develop a feed mill that was a pretty high volume feed mill. I believe it was 65,000 tons a year feed mill. So think semi trucks, not pickup trucks that would be getting that feed. And this was pretty, I think, pretty exciting because of the opportunities that it provided for the city in terms of employment. There would be 19 within 5 years, there would be 19 employees there, and they would all be making above far above the median wage of that county and city. So some pretty exciting things for, I think, for the community, and really begin to develop a cluster and be able to take the products that were being produced in that region and utilize them for feed, as well as address a feed shortage in that area and be able to export that feed into areas of Nebraska and Colorado, as well as throughout the state. So some pretty exciting things there. And that project was presented to our board at the end of September, or maybe it was October 1st. I think either one of those. So right at the end of the month, last month, and that project was unanimously approved by our board in terms of presenting it to SLIB as something that we approve for funding. And from that point, that project, though, when it was presented to the SLIB the next week, that project was not approved. So as it stands, excuse me, as it stands today, that project is exploring other options, looking for other things that it can do, but it will not be utilizing at this point the Business Ready Communities program. And I'm happy to answer any questions on that if I can.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Could you go through just briefly your, I think some of the members of the committee might not be aware that you have a board that works through what you've developed and the whole process, and maybe describe how it does end with the SLIB board.
You bet. Chairman Boner, Chairman Eklund, yes, happy to do so. So the way this works is the application is developed through the municipality or a joint powers board. And in this case, it was the city of Torrington put together an application. Our team works on that application, ensures that it meets the rules and the statute for business ready communities, and develops that application. And it works through a series of site visits with our team. Our team then writes up a report and makes a recommendation based on all of the factors that we consider. This was a time where we utilized heavily what we call an evaluation tool. So there are a number of elements that we consider when we look at a project, and whether it be business strength and community support and the funding sources that are there. So that is all put together in our committee within our a small subset of the board, then reviews it, asks questions, digs down, tries to understand it better, and then it's further refined. And then it's presented to our board of directors, or 13 members of the business community throughout Wyoming. And that board of directors then, in a public forum, looks at the project, understands it, takes in public input, asks their own questions of our staff and make sure that they fully understand it. And then at that point, they provide and take action on a recommendation of funding. And so they, at that point, recommended that this project be funded. Representative Eklund, did that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, committee? Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, we have an Asia Pacific Trade Office. Could you explain that a little bit to us, how that works, what it costs us to have that office, and what has that brought to the table as we endeavor to market our agricultural products here in Wyoming?
Yes, sir. Chairman Boner, Representative Heiner, that's a great question. So we do have an Asia Pacific Trade Office. That was something that came out of the Endow legislation and was recommended there. And that costs us about $400,000 per biennium. Now that has been something that it does take quite a bit of time. I just want to make sure that working through those things take a lot of time. And in terms of agriculture, I think our first attempt was to provide meat and provide beef to a hotel chain there. That has been it's been a challenge. frankly. It's been really tough for a number of reasons. And so we actually undertook a little bit of a study after we initially attempted that. And that is ongoing. Now, I will say that in terms of agriculture as a whole, one of the things that has been a bit of a success there is our ability to work with one of our distillers in Wyoming and provide product to Taiwan through one of our distillers. Backwards Distilling is supplying their products to the Taiwan market. It is something that is not just utilized for agriculture, though. That trade office is looking at other ways to connect businesses, and in one case, an education and technology business is now connecting with the Taiwanese government to provide some services and opportunities there. Thank you for your question.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, going back to the proposal from Torrington, just first of all, I want to thank you. We've been, or at least I've been publicly very, very much wanting to encourage you to find these value-added agriculture projects, and looks like you did everything you could to get that going. And Torrington seems like it certainly fit a need in the community and the state. And I have to say I'm a little disappointed that it didn't get through, and through no fault of the business council, the SLIB just didn't approve it. But when your board met, the business council board met, was there any opposition from the local community that you were aware of? And just don't want to put you in a position where you're questioning the decisions of the board, but just if you could go in a little bit more detail why you think that that project didn't make it all the way through, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Boner. And to do my best to really kind of paraphrase some of the discussion points that were had during the board meeting, and I believe these were also presented at SLIB. But there was a lot of support for this project, and we gauged that. But there were also some concerns on a couple different levels, and I'll do my best to paraphrase them. As competition was one. And the amount of competition was unclear to us as our entity, as well as our board, even though those questions were asked directly, and totally respect those who are facing that competition to keep that private. That's their decision to say, I'm not willing to disclose how much it might compete with me. So we were unable to really assess and fully understand how much competition that this new feed mill might induce. We did recognize and understand that is part of the nature of it. So that was one element, was the competition and perceived competition without really knowing how much there was. I believe the other comments that we received from the public that were from a negative perspective were really about government interference in the free market. And just some philosophical stances on the role of government in providing a community with funds to build infrastructure. And one thing I do want to, if I might just address on that topic, is it's a challenge for us to explain the Business Ready Communities program, especially when it comes to business committed projects. And that's because business committed projects, I think that many folks believe that we're delivering money directly to a business. And those of us who know the Constitution pretty well know that we can't do that without adequate consideration. And so the Business Ready Community program doesn't actually deliver money directly to a business. And so we work through the city to develop of infrastructure, and in both the case of a grant and a loan. The loan obviously gets paid back to the state, but in a lot of cases, what people don't understand is that grant, it's not really a grant. It's not free money that goes out there. What it is it's money that develops infrastructure or a building that then the business actually leases from the city. So the business is paying money in as well. So the city then benefits from having infrastructure that it can use for economic development, and having revenue come in through that from the business to, again, work on economic development. So I look at it as we're keeping that money in the family by providing it to a community to develop their own economy. So that was one of the, that was the other issue that came about. I think those are the two main parts of opposition, just the philosophical, whether government should be involved at all, and then also the competitive nature.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, well, once again, I appreciate your efforts, and I just want to publicly acknowledge that you are doing what you can to add value to Wyoming production agriculture. And it's unfortunate this one didn't turn out, but I look forward to the next project. So without any further questions on that topic, please continue with your testimony if you have any more.
I think, Mr. Chairman, if I could just talk briefly about the perhaps, an overview of how the business relief program audit was performed. I think it's important to note that the legislation that put forth the business relief programs did not require an audit. It said that we may choose to do an audit. And at the Business Council, along with discussions amongst folks within the executive branch, the legislative branch, and also the judicial branch, we decided that it would be the right thing to do to develop an audit process of the funds that were delivered through the business relief programs, so that we could be good stewards of the Treasury's money and make sure that we were doing the right thing as we did that. And as I'm sure all of you, it's actually pretty interesting how difficult it is to think back to only a year ago and how things were different and how decisions were made. And looking in hindsight it's enlightening. It's good to reflect, but it's also hard to remember how difficult those situations were, and how challenging it was for our business community. So we undertook an audit in order to, I believe, to do the right thing with that Treasury money, and also to ensure that the program was run as best it could, balancing that speed, but also knowing that we had to provide support for survival as fast as possible. We undertook that by looking at industry standards. And the first thing that we did is we realized we're the Wyoming Business Council. Audit is not something that's in our strategic plan. It's not something that we are set up to do. And so, and also, frankly, the best thing to do in those cases is to have a third-party auditor perform that audit. So we engaged with a company, a Wyoming company, who was able to help us with that audit and perform the audit. And they are a company that has done a number of audits for government entities and really perform these and understands the industry standards. They understand the techniques used to select those who will be audited. And they understand the information that is needed to gather and to perform those audits. So that was undertaken. And one of the things that we did is while in overall it was a random audit, it's important to note that we took a look at certain audit flags as we gathered information. And so there are a number of things that flag an audit and raise its priority in the audit. And so we had a number of different classifications. And in some cases, if you hit every audit flag, you were going to get an audit. And in other cases, you might not hit any audit flags, but you were randomly selected to be audited. We selected more than the industry standard was required for a number of companies to be audited. And one of the things that might be a little bit, I don't know if it's misleading, but it just takes a little bit more to understand, is that because of the audit flags and because we actually took in whistleblower comments about businesses and companies throughout the state, those maybe were a little bit higher risk, if you will. If you hit every audit flag, it's possible that you might be a little bit more risky and have findings in your audit. So some of the audit findings and the number of things where we found issues that needed to be repaid, it might make it look like, wow, a lot of companies or a high percentage of companies were at risk and had audit findings. But what it really means is that the screening that we did to find the candidates for audit were probably the right ones to find. And so because we did that, that's where the audit findings were. Now, over the course of that time, we worked to recoup that money, to put it back into the CARES Act and to be able to utilize it again. The nice thing about having this extra year to use that funding is that the money that we recovered, we would then be able to utilize. Now, one of the challenges is recovering all of that money. And so we did our best to recover that money, but we were not able to recover all of it. And so one of the things that we did was it decided at this point, we would present our findings of who has submitted their money back and who has not, and provide that information to the Attorney General's office for their choices or what to do next. I don't know what will happen next. I also don't know what the federal government might ask of those of that information as well.
Yeah, well, thank you for that update. I know it's maybe not exactly, in line with what we're primarily focused on with the Agriculture Committee, but certainly a topic of discussion. And just want to point out also for those of us who were here during the special session in 2020, that was a decision the legislature made to prioritize getting those funds out to the private sector. And maybe, the trade-off there was that, there's an increased opportunity for fraud. So I appreciate your diligence in trying to identify those cases where there was fraud and trying to recoup those public funds. But certainly, the discussion now for us, I think, since that was our decision collectively, is how do we proceed? Do we need to have a little bit more diligence from our end, especially as a legislature, since we did that was our decision basically, and the business council just executed it. So anyway, so just want to add that additional commentary. Any questions, committee? Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the only question that I have, and I think I've asked it in other committees. So we've had places that were European companies that were listed as LLCs or corporations that received money. Have we ever talked publicly about this and put it out there? So, I mean, I think the whole world should know that some of these companies came to Wyoming and pilfered money. I mean, have we ever talked about any of that? Or I've had credible reports that was one of the things that did trigger the audit, is because what we had companies that had come to Wyoming by being registered in Wyoming, and they received checks. We had checks that went out of the country. Have we ever done a report on that?
Chairman Boner, Senator Bouchard, to my knowledge, no checks left the country, were sent out of the country to businesses outside the country. All of this information is available on Wyopen, and it's available for use. And I'd be happy to supply even further information if you'd like. But I don't. Perhaps you could provide a specific example of that, and I could dig in.
Thank you, Chairman. To follow up, I mean, what happened is we have companies that file behind a hidden firewall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what, I mean, I don't want to even speak on specifics because of the things that, I mean, they're probably things I'm not even supposed to know because they're behind a firewall. Because when a company files a LLC and then they have a registered agent, and the registered agent handles everything, so you may not know it went outside of the state, but there are things that did happen. Maybe you're not aware they happened, but somehow we've got to look back at that, so we know that there are people that are bad actors and take advantage of us. So that's kind of where I'm going with it.
So Chairman Boner, Senator Bouchard, you're right. Registered agents are something that we're aware of. We actually did look into that. And we found that was not just an area of audit, but it's also an area that we looked very, very closely at in the application process to, one, ensure that the primary work was in Wyoming and that we weren't funneling that through a registered agent. So that is something that was caught in the application process as well as in the audit process. So again, I would have to dig into the specifics. One thing that does tend to happen in these is that the exceptional events tend to be blown up as that's the rule. And we did find we found a few cases where people were being fraudulent. And those tend to be the ones that stick in our minds. And in fact, in some cases, we were the entity that found out that fraud was deeper and wider than just the business relief programs. And so, I get it. It happens. We did our best in the application process as well as the audit process to stop that. And registered agents is a case that we understand for sure. That's one of the things that Wyoming has is the number of registered agents, and registering your company in Wyoming is something that we encourage. But the intent of these programs was for those folks who had their primary work in Wyoming. And there are just as many cases of businesses who, because they started in Wyoming and have a bulk of their office in Wyoming, but they had satellite offices across the nation, they were actually not eligible to take advantage of the business relief programs because the percentage of their company wasn't fully in Wyoming or a big enough percentage in Wyoming. So they're Wyoming companies where the wealth grows in Wyoming and the businesses support Wyoming communities, but because of that. So I hear where you're coming from, and that is a case that we did explore in both the application and the audit. But we also have to remember that there are exceptional cases on the other side as well.
One more follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And this is the most dialogue I've had. It was public. So,
Yeah.
And I think the question, and maybe it's a little bit beyond the scope of our committee, but I think we still do need to look at this. I certainly don't ever want to breach that registered agent relationship that is private. But I think we do need to look at, because it's much wider. It shows how easily something can happen. That's what, I mean, I was at special session. I know what we were dealing with, and all of a sudden it was thrown into your lap. But that's when we kind of found that this stuff could happen. So I think in the future, we do need to look at legislation that actually puts very strict penalties if they do breach or break the law. And that way we can go after them for big fines and even prison time, because understand, we were trying to help people that needed help, and then there were predatory practices trying to get that money. So so I'm glad we're having this discussion. That's where I want to go. That's where every time I brought this up, that's where I'm going. So thank you.
Thank you. Feel free to respond if you want, or I didn't hear a question.
Yeah, Chairman Boner, I just think, thanks for the discussion. I agree. I think a healthy discussion around this is important, and really dig in on the problems and the potential solutions is the good way to do that. So thank you.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one small question that goes along with this. Director, the Wyoming Business Council was saddled with a huge monumental task last year, and I applaud your efforts of the whole group to disperse that money that was given to us on a very short timeline. It was a huge task and outside of your normal activities, and I appreciate that very much. But I think we are all on the same page that there is a lot of fraud in the world today. Every time we try to do something, people are trying to take advantage of us. And I think your group and the legislature, we're on the same page that we'd like to find that and resolve that issue so that we're not fraudulently giving money, or people are not fraudulently taking money from us. And that's kind of our responsibilities as a legislature to steward that money. So in your experience, and you're very well versed in this, much more than we are, what would you suggest we as the legislature do at this point to try to amend some of that money that may have been fraudulently taken, and may, so that we may discover some of that. So our constituents feel comfortable that we're doing everything within our power to make sure that this went to those in need and not to somebody that was just out trying to get money for their own selves. And, you know, I'd like you to be frank about this. If there's anything we can do as a legislature to help this, and not necessarily the Wyoming Business Council, because I think you've done your duty. You've done everything that was required and asked of you. But maybe there's other departments within the state, that the auditor, the state auditor department or something that we can resource to collect some of this money that is due back to us. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Heiner, that's a really good question. And I, as much as I'm versed in the audit process that we undertook, and as much as I understand the business relief programs and the process behind all of that, I think it's a little bit more challenging than saying, let's run after all of that money. Because one, I don't know how much money there really is. I know that there's the fear that we were defrauded a lot. But I also know that there were a lot of the vast majority of businesses who did the right thing. And so I really believe that it is worthy of a discussion, and it is worthy of seeing all of the perspectives at the table. Because one of the interesting things that I did get to experience in this audit process was the varying points of view around the audit. And whether that be, you know, golly, we've got to go down and dig into every piece of information that every one of those applicants, you know, provided, down to the level of, well, look, the intent was to just get this money into the hands of businesses and let them do their thing. So let's not even do an audit. So there was a really big spectrum. And I do think it's worthy of a discussion. But I also would make sure that we focus on, you know, what problem are we trying to solve? And are we trying to rid the world of fraud? Well, that's a pretty big challenge. I don't know if the Joint Ag Committee and the Wyoming Business Council together could cover that one. But and I say that in a bit in jest, but I also know that it is something that there are varied opinions on it in the state, around the legislature as well as other branches on how to do that. It's worthy of a discussion, but I think going into it with an open mind, and then also understanding the kind of the law of diminishing returns. And even though fraud really does stick in my craw, I also realize the practicalities of the matter, and making sure that the state can continue to push forward. So I would be happy to engage in that discussion and provide information on that discussion. But it's something that I really don't have the silver bullet or the best ideas to fix that.
Okay, I think Representative Western has his hand up online. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Durrell, so I'm going to bring it back to the Business Council and ag business. My question is, are there a lot of folks out there, either local communities or private sector folks, who are really eyeing the BRC process as kind of a vehicle for ag related opportunities? Is what's that applicant pool looking like, or a pool of interested parties? Is it pretty deep right now, or are there a lot of people looking at using the BRC process as a vehicle for ag projects?
Chairman Boner, thank you. And Representative Western, yes, in pockets within our state, there are definitely regions that are much more ag related and looking at ways to add value to ag. So I've heard of some up in the northwest part of the state. There are a number that our regional directors work on there. And then of course, obviously in the southeastern portion of the state as well. And so our regional directors are out there listening and trying to find those projects. But I would say the bulk of them come from those two areas for the most part. I don't have a specific answer for the number of projects in our funnel, if you will, today, but.
Mr. Chairman, no follow-up.
Yeah,
Thank
go
you.
ahead. Go ahead, Representative Western.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I have no follow-up. Thank you, Director.
Too much time to miss us all for me, so. Okay, any further questions, committee? Okay, well, appreciate your due diligence, and I guess just one question going back to the audit. So you did that on your own initiative, and I appreciate that. Where'd the funding come from for the audit? How'd you find the funds to do that?
Mr. Chairman, the funds that we used to pay the third-party auditor came from the CARES Act. So that money was directly from the CARES Act funding. Thank you.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, well, I appreciate your testimony. I believe your next topic was the bill we have before us. Is that correct? Anything else before we get to that?
Mr. Chairman, no, sir. I think that we have nothing else to provide. And as I mentioned, Jill Tregemba has provided the ag report in the materials. But I believe that is the final topic we'd like to discuss today. So thank you.
Okay, all right. And yeah, you did provide some information as far as the number of, I guess, the increase in capacity we've seen recently in our meat processing. And certainly appreciate that information. Could you maybe just touch on that a little bit? I know that's something that at least I'm interested in, and it's been something that we've done admittedly through the Department of Agriculture, but certainly, as we kind of get out of emergency mode when it comes to increasing this capacity, I think it's probably something that the Business Council hopefully will continue to work on. And, it's definitely in line with the value added to our ag products is having more meat processing capacity. So if you have an opportunity or just give me an opportunity to go ahead and discuss the improvements that we've seen and try to, I think it's important to kind of measure where we've been, where we're going, and so we have a good idea where, what the future holds. So if just a little bit more information on that topic would be great.
Mr. Chairman, Jill Tregemba, Agribusiness Manager for the Business Council. Provided in your packet is this report, which came to us as a direction to do an annual report. This is the very first one. At the direction of the chairman, he had a few questions that we specifically addressed in the report on meat processing. And those are outlined starting on page 4. And talk about how many processing plants were added over the last year. And these are directly related to the governor's meat processing grant program that the Department of Ag administered. So the Department of Ag provided this information for us. We've worked closely with them, and you can see that there's 4 new plants added over the last year as a direct result of that program. And under construction, there's also 4. And then there's corresponding increases. One of the challenges we have in the state is tracking capacity, and that's because custom plants aren't required to report that capacity, and federal plants are required to report it to the federal entity. So that is something we look forward to pulling the information together for you next year. When we finish up this CARES Act funding, we'll take a look back at where we were before and then compile all that data so that we have a clear vision as to where we were and where we are now, and look at custom, state, and federal capacity.
Okay, so any questions on that report you received, committee? And just a comment, so you're aware the Department of Agriculture has, I guess, issued a Freedom of Information Act request to the USDA. So just so you're aware, don't want you guys wasting your time, with 2 agencies, in case you didn't know. But they are working on that, in collecting that federal data. It's kind of silly that you have to do a FOIA request to get that information. But yeah, like I said, I think it's important that we kind of measure where we're at so we understand where we're going. We all know where we've been, and it's probably not adequate. And so I appreciate all your efforts and certainly the Department of Agriculture's efforts to increase this vital capacity, not just for our producers, but for our consumers who don't like to see empty shelves when it comes, when they get to the meat section of their grocery store. So any further questions, committee? Okay, well, I appreciate it. Any further testimony you have right now? I think after you're done, we're going to have our staff attorneys come up and go over the bill draft we have before us. But before that, any additional comments?
No, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee for listening today, for the questions, and hopefully we've been able to provide some of those answers that you needed. So thank you.
All right, well, appreciate it. Thank you very much. So next on the agenda, we're gonna discuss the bill draft we have before us. I think, Mr. Jarvis, you're gonna come up and explain what is a longer bill than I could have imagined, but the idea is very simple in that we take these industrial revenue bonds committee. If you remember, that was it had some good research by our LSO at our meeting in Gillette. Basically, this is something that's currently available. It's basically a tax break in the federal tax code where a company doesn't have to pay taxes on the revenue from any bonds, and that can translate into a lower interest rate, but it has to be designated. It has to be a specific project designated by either local or state government. And the best example of a functioning program at the state level is the WCDA, Wyoming Community Development Authority, where they have below market rate interest loans for certain, especially first-time home buyers. And we're looking to give the Business Council another tool in their toolbox to help, I guess, designate, act as a conduit, I believe the term is, to go ahead and allow for this this tax break to take full effect. Also want to remind the committee that roughly, speaking of rough numbers, the state of Wyoming can designate up to $300 million worth of projects or loans, I guess you could say. We do about half that, primarily through the WCDA. There's been some attempts by local government. They have the capacity now to designate projects up to $10 million. I think we have a good example in Converse County, at least, of the county commissioners designating that. And then, the company went out and tried to find private funding. They couldn't do it. So there's been attempts, but it hasn't worked. But so anyways, the idea of the bill is to use this as an opportunity to have a lower interest rate. Maybe that'll make a difference, especially in these commodity type businesses. We're talking about agriculture and adding value. A 0.5% break on the interest rate could make a big difference. And once again, this is going to be private funding, no government funds are at risk. It's just simply a tax break in the federal tax code that we are not taking full advantage of. So anyways, that's the summary as far as I understand it, and look forward to description of this bill. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your summary, my work here is done. Your summary is done. The bill specifically, I just wanted to orient the committee to the bill draft that you saw in September, whatever our last meeting was, September. Basically is where this bill is from page 11 forward. And just to orient you, I wanted to, page 11 forward, that's the cities and counties' ability to issue the industrial revenue bonds. And so that stuff will look familiar with what you looked at the previous meeting, 15-1-701 and 15-1-702. But just to, again, to orient you, from that meeting, the committee wanted to and add a requirement for there to be add the size requirement and the and the size, and that it's headquartered in Wyoming. So that stuff, just so you know, that was done from the last meeting and carried through. Now, to go back to page 1 of the bill, what this does is it authorizes the Wyoming Business Council to issue revenue bonds as specified. And so we're going to go through all of the as specified and how it is in this bill. And this is based just very much off of the Energy Authority's revenue bond issuing authority for their other projects, not the pipelines. They have 2 different sections, and one is their other projects, which is so analogous to, for example, meat processing projects. So is based on that. This also, that's what we're going to go through, and some of the limitations on the authority as well. So what the authority is and what the limitations are on it. So if we go to page 2 is where this begins. We're creating sections in 9-12-109. And 9-12-109, that's the business council statutes and describing what they do. And then specifically in 9-12-109, that's the promotion of agriculture. So right there, even just the location of this is, this isn't giving a broad across authority across the board, or broad authority across the board to the business council to issue any bonds of any sort. These are purely for agriculture. And as you'll see, they are for, if we go right down, starting at line 12, that we're in this ag promotion section, and starting at line 12 on page 2, that they are giving them the authority to issue and have outstanding bonds. And here's what for: to finance, construct, develop, maintain, or operate meat processing projects for international, in-state, and interstate sales. So that's limited to these meat projects. And then it describes, then it says which bonds shall not exceed in the aggregate an amount of $50 million. I just wanted to point out here that I think that I misunderstood a directive to me about the 50 million. I think it was a per project one, so that where it says in the aggregate may need to be a per project, and that was my own misunderstanding of the directive there. So anyway, so then it goes forth to say the principal amount of any bonds that have been retired, redeemed, defeased, or refunded by the council need not be taken into account in computing the compliance with the maximum amounts. So just when each project is separately accounted for. And then here's the kind of the description of revenue bonds as this committee would, this will look familiar to the information that you were given at the first meeting in May. The exercise of the powers granted by this paragraph, I'm on line 21 and moving forward, constitutes the performance of an essential government function. It needs to be, revenue bonds need to be through issued from that sort of a perspective, and that any bonds issued under this paragraph and the income therefrom shall be free from taxation of every kind by the state, municipalities, and political subdivisions of the state. That's the kind of fundamental description or definition of a revenue bond. Revenue bonds under this paragraph shall be issued according to subsections E through N of this section. So that's the as specified, and we'll go into all of the details of these revenue bonds then. So subsection E on page 3 that begins on line 7, it is saying that, okay, so in addition to these powers and for the purposes that are in the paragraph that we just read, the council may issue these bonds in amounts that the council determines necessary to provide funds for the projects that it has vetted out, the meat processing projects. And that it may, and the council, these are just some of the things that the council needs to have the authority to do. It may have the authority to enter into contracts to ensure the payment of principal and to guarantee, to be able to guarantee the financing of these projects. Now, on line 19, it's going to, of the subsection E, it's going to start several paragraphs that describe what some of the purposes and the requirements of these bonds are. So it's all bonds issued under this subsection. Here, this is just some, to be correct, they're negotiable instruments. That's on line 21. And now I'm going over to page 4 and looking at paragraphs 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that they're payable solely out of the funds that come back from the project, and that they shall bear interest at it describes it I'm not trying to gloss over this too high. I just don't want to sit there and read it to you. Line 4 or paragraph 4, this one, I think the committee will probably interested in. They are not general obligations of the state nor any political subdivisions of the state. They shall solely be the obligation of the council and shall recite on their face that they do not constitute obligations of the state or any political subdivision of the state. Paragraph 5, they also may be payable in installments. So these are aspects and, you know, characteristics of the bonds. Now I'm moving on to page 5, and there are additional paragraphs to describe the characteristics of these bonds, that when they can be paid, and that they can contain an option to be redeemed all or in part. So, you know, it's really setting out some specifications so that they're not just thrown to the wind to create all on their own. By they, I mean the business council. There are some guidelines and some parameters, or as they like to say in the legislature, some sideboards to these things. On paragraph 7, they can be sold at above or below par value as far as the bonds go. Paragraph 8, starting on line 19, it does specify, you know, these are legal investments that may be used as collateral. So it's just laying out that these are, as an investor would expect them to be, for, you know, to be able to depend on them. And then moving on to page 6, there's one additional, they may contain other provisions that aren't inconsistent with all of the parameters that were set before it. Now subsection F that begins on page 6, line 7, this is that describes how the bond, the previous stuff was how the characteristics of the bonds. Now this is how the bonds work. So that the principals and interest on any revenue bonds shall be secured by a pledge of the revenues from the operation of the meat processing project as financed. That's again, part of the definition of revenue bonds, is that whatever the revenue from whatever the thing that's being financed is, that's what turns around and pays for it. So that this describes how they function. So it's either the revenue from it, or by a first mortgage on the facilities, or by guarantees and pledges of the entity owning the project or the parent corporation or the entity. You know, so this is how the assurance that they're going to be paid. That's the way that these work. Then it describes how the terms of the guarantees and pledges that the project needs to make back to the council, and just that some of the additional aspects that may be required of the project itself as it operates and repays these bonds. And now moving on to page 7 and subsection G, what subsection G takes care of is it specifies that each pledge, agreement, or mortgage or other instrument that's made for the benefit or security of the revenue from the bonds is valid and binding from the time it's made. So this is the kind of the legal aspects that these things are valid and binding, and that the revenues and receipts and monies and assets are immediately subject to a lien on the pledge without delivery or further act. So that's some of the additional security of this. And then that lien that is that they're subject to is legal and binding. And then moving on, then on subsection H, which starts on line 16. This is a pledge of the state. Someone who purchases these bonds wants wants to feel good, wants some security in the idea that the state's not just going to change the business council role suddenly. So that's what subsection H is. It's the state pledges to the holders of any bonds that are issued under subsection E that the state will not limit or alter the rights vested in the council to fulfill the terms of the agreements. So we're not going to change it midstream. If someone has purchased these bonds, they're not going to suddenly be changed on them by an act of the state. That's this pledge in subsection H. And then on page 8, moving to page 8, subsection J, this is subsection J gives some additional powers to the council to make sure that they can actually administer and authorize these. So in addition to things that they can already do, they can provide for the issuance of bonds. And they can acquire, purchase, make prepayments for, or, do all the things that they would need to do from a financial perspective to be able to make things happen. This is some of the logistics basically in subsection J. And some of those additional paragraphs that describe J continue on to page 9. And that things that the council is given the ability to do to be able to execute these bonds. Then on line 11 is the subsection K, which describes that, this accounts for the council being able to assess or collect fees that are non-refundable from applicants who are seeking to obtain council funding of a meat processing plant in total amounts not to exceed a $50,000 fee, which shall be credited to the state general fund, and the council shall require that any entity receiving financing under this section shall. And these are some of the same requirements that the committee wanted for the cities and towns, that it needs to be headquartered in Wyoming and organized under the laws of the state of Wyoming. And the committee also wanted a size thing. They wanted this to be kind of small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses. And in statute, putting just the term small is not really quantifiable. So what the committee has in their materials, just after this bill draft, you'll see the U.S. Small Business Administration table of small business size standards. This is not some dictate or some magic document. If the committee wants to go with some other quantification of size, it certainly can. But these, there's also often this thing called NAICS, these codes for businesses that they quantify sizes and types of businesses. So it seemed like a reasonable resource to point to. And that's what this does. At the bottom of page 9, it says one of these entities that's financed needs to fall within the United States Small Business Administration small business size standards for its industry classification code effective August 19th, 2019. So that's the actual ones that are in your document that pointing to, so that there can be some size standards rather than just small as far as the size. That's what the purpose is there. And then also an entity that receives funds needs to maintain records for state auditor inspection. We were just talking about audits. And then on page 10, subsection M, which starts on line 8, the council shall maintain, the council, so the paragraph above it just was saying that the entity needs to maintain records. Now we're on to the council needs to maintain records and accounts of revenues and expenditures of all of the bonds that are subject and issued under this subsection. And that it also needs to conduct an annual financial and legal compliance audit of the accounts of the council and file copies of the audit with the governor and the legislature. There's some accountability and some oversight of any bonds that are issued is what's in subsection M. Then also on page 10 in subsection N, this is a recourse of a party who is aggrieved that the sole recourse shall be against the council, and there shall be no cause of action against the state or any county, municipality, or other political subdivision of the state with reference to these bonds. That is a high level overview of the different sections of the authority that's given to the business council in this bill draft to give them what the bonds should look like, as far as that they are legal instruments, but then also what the issuers need to do and what the different parties' responsibilities are. And you'll see at the top of page 11 that this, I point actually to the Wyoming Energy Authority revenue bonds for other projects that this was based off of, in case, just to orient you in case the committee was familiar with those. And also I know in the May meeting, the committee as a reference point heard a lot about those Wyoming Energy Authority revenue bonding authority. So it just to say that this isn't just created out of whole cloth new, it's based on a model that already existed. And then now we're back to page 11 where we started and where this bill, what this bill looked like at the previous meeting. And then finally, so I'm going to skip to page 13. And in section 2, this is that the Wyoming Business Council shall promulgate rules as necessary to implement this act. And then also in subsection B of that section 2, municipalities, counties, or joint powers boards shall amend any of their rules necessary to implement this act. Because remember, there's that the parts from the last bill that are adding agriculture to the industrial revenue bonds aspects. And then finally on page 14 is one of those split effective dates that just allows for the rules to be promulgated before the project goes into or before all the rest of the stuff goes into effect.
Okay, thank you for that overview of the bill. Any questions, committee? Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Jarvis. In the statutes that allow municipalities to do this, is there this much statute? Or does it simply push the most of the responsibilities onto the person that obtains the bond? Just a question. Or did you get that deep in your research?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, cities, municipalities and counties and things are just different entities because they can tax and their authorities are laid out and strewn out throughout statutes. If we were to go through and compile, okay, of all of their different aspects in all of Title 16 and 15, as far as all of the different authorities that they are permitted, that allow them to issue the industrial revenue bonds, I think that it probably would compile to something similar to this. It's just that their stuff is spread out because they issue other types of bonding and stuff like that. So their statutes are more spread out. They don't just have it kind of condensed 5 subsections that say revenue bonds. And that's because they can do other things.
Any further questions, committee? Representative Moore.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I'm not sure, this might be a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I don't know. I was wanting to know what the process was, how the business council promulgates rules. I don't know if they have a formal process. I mean, I'm familiar with some of that, but I have consternation when we, as a legislative body, give the ability for other entities to come up with rules that people have to live by. So I just wondered if you understand, Mr. Jarvis, what that process is that they utilize, how they develop their rules. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Worf. One thing that I know that the legislature is always conscious of, first of all, even in any rulemaking, is to not give special words just left me, but to not delegate more power, not just say, go do this project. The legislature always needs to add some parameters for a project. And so before any rulemaking, and this is just like kind of very broad, before any agency makes its rules, the legislature needs to put in the parameters of how it looks so that now it might be that the agency then goes in and says, well, we want applications to be due on a Tuesday and on this form, but what the application is for, the legislature has already laid out that things that it has to have. So the key components are in this bill, and no rule can go against what the legislature has laid out in this rule. And the reason I say that is that some of the is I'm kind of starting at the end of a rulemaking process, is one of the aspects of the rulemaking, actually the legislature, and including the LSO and the legislature, they review rules after they've kind of been drafted for any agency, including the business council, to say, yes, this appears to be within the statutory intent, because all rules need to be within the statutory intent. So that's at the end of the process. But then now back to the beginning. So once something is passed that says, okay, here's a program or some authority that the legislature describes that you can have or ought to do, or a project that you should create, make some rules to actually make it happen. You know, do applicants need to submit or, just what the rules are, the finer details to make the big print, those sideboards happen. And there is the the Wyoming Administrative Procedure Act that most agencies need to follow for as far as the deadlines for when they promulgate a rule and then they submit it or they send it out for comment and things. Now, the Wyoming Business Council is exempted from some of the rules in statute. The legislature did that, exempted them from some of the rules of the Administrative Procedure Act for promulgation of rules. And my understanding is that a lot of that is for confidentiality purposes, not to keep it from people, but like, let's say their rules are having to do with, see, it's hard. It's never good to think of hypotheticals right on the fly, but to try to, if their rules are about some specific item that might have business proprietary reasons, well, it would still go past the legislature and the other review, but might not be put out for comment for the 45-day period that other agency might. And so I'm speaking kind of in a general terms, just to know that they have been exempted from some of the rules, but there was some rationale and reason that the legislature did that, whatever it was. And whenever they've exempted people from aspects of the Administrative Procedure Act for promulgation of rules, there have been some rationale put to it. And so, but that's their process. So they go through a process and there is review whenever there's rules. And people are able to then, when there are rules that they question, they can raise it with the entity or with the legislature or with the governor.
Right, and so, and just to be clear, I mean, that goes through the management council specifically, and we'll get notice, say, I remember we got a notice not too long ago of a agriculture committee bill from like 2018 or something, where is dealing with the state fair, actually, where we gave them the option of forming a subcommittee to deal only with the fair, and they didn't, we gave the state fair board the ability to do that. They chose to exercise that option just recently, and so we got a notice that you should have been in your email inbox, not that those aren't already full, to say, okay, these are the rules we're going to promulgate. And so there's that, I guess, that procedure that fell safe, I guess, to go back to the legislature and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Is this within the intent of, in that case, Senate File, whatever, 45 from 2018. So that's, I think there's a check and balance there where they come back beyond just the public comment period, which is also goes through the governor's office and the agency. So yeah, pretty robust process, I'd say, to make sure that they follow the intent. And as Heather pointed out, I mean, if we don't want them to do something, that needs to be in the legislation. So anyway, so you had to follow.
Well, and yeah, I just had a follow-up. So, and you kind of, I think, answered it, but as Ms. Jarvis, you said that it comes back before the legislature, but it sounds like it comes back before the management council. So it doesn't come back to the body as a whole. And I guess that's one of the concerns I always have is, not being on management council, I never get to see that process. So that's one of the reasons why I asked, but it does involve a public process, because I'm familiar with how the rules are promulgated in other places, other agencies I've worked with, but I figured there's a standard, and I just wasn't familiar with how the business council operated, but it sounds like that process is there, and that's where it goes through, is it's actually through the management council is where that's actually presented once it's final.
Mr. Chairman, there's more.
Yes.
In the Representative Worf, the management council process is, once the LSO has gone through and seen if it appears to be within the statutory intent. However, the process that that Chairman Boner just described is when there has been a sponsor of a bill, whether it's a committee or an individual sponsor or co-sponsors, and when an agency is promulgating new rules, that they send an intent to promulgate new rules to LSO, or they're supposed to. I mean, sometimes forget. And then that's one of the things that we call out and we're like, and where we say, it looks like they didn't go through all the process they were supposed to. But they send their intent to, that they're going to promulgate new rules. And then LSO sends one of those emails that Senator Boner or that Chairman Boner was describing to let the committee know in advance, or that let the sponsor of that bill say, remember that bill? Now's when they're doing those rules. And so that's at the front end. And then the management council is at the back end of when they come out. So sponsors do get it. However, I am not certain if that is one of the provisions from which the business council is exempted, that new rule thing. I think they, most likely there's notice that they're going to be promulgating the rules. I think that their exemption, I think largely comes from the length of the public comment time, but they can speak more to that of which ones they're exempted from.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would like to ask a list of, maybe you can provide us with the list of what those exemptions are, because I would like to know what the exemptions are. I weren't here when they were granted. And I'd like to know what the exemptions are so I can look at the bill and make sure that if there's things that they're exempt from that's not captured in this bill that I think they should be accounted, then we need to add it to the bill. That's my understanding. So if we could get a listing of what they've been exempted from, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's a specific statute that I can just send to the committee right now, so as soon as I get back to my desk.
Yeah,
That
that'd be
that describes what the business council, I think, I'll double check though.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. And I'm thinking back, the only time I've ever even heard of, legislator having a problem with the rules, I think it was the initial passing of the Food Freedom Act back in 2015, and where the prime sponsor of that bill said, no, that's, you're not doing it the way, that's not what the bill said, but there is an opportunity in that process beyond just the, the obvious like public, process. Everybody has an opportunity to comment on the rules. Obviously, Heather, I think, described it very well, where we, our staff and the agency goes out of their way to make sure that we're notified and we're aware that, hey, these rules are being promulgated. And if you have a problem with it, at least you know what they are. And I've never heard of an agency in that one instance that just ignored a legislator or a committee that said they just went off on their own, and accomplished something that was not the intent of the bill. So yeah, I think it's a pretty good process, robust process, but I'm looking forward to hearing about the exceptions. I think that's it's good. I learned something today from your line of questioning, Representative, so appreciate you asking. So, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman. So in the statutes that allow, I believe, and correct me if I've got the wrong agency, but the Rural Development Authority to do these for low-income housing, is it similar statute to this? Is that where you kind of based a lot of this, or do they have a different route that they take for their bonding authorities?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, that's the Wyoming Community Development Authority, and theirs is similar, but this bill doesn't, the specifics, and a lot of the specifics grant that the bonds are negotiable instruments and what needs to go into them and how they work. Those are the same, but as far as the actual specific authorities granted to the business council in this bill, those are more analogous to what's granted to the Energy Authority. Because the Wyoming Community Development Authority, theirs are on specific mortgages for housing, whereas the Energy Authority was talking about projects and the idea of funding and developing projects. And so the type of thing that's being financed through the revenue bonds was more analogous, and that's why that it was modeled. And those are also more recent statutes. The Energy Authority ones, whereas the Community Development Authority bonds, or the Wyoming Community Development Authority, some of those statutes have been pieced together because they started in like 1978, and then it was dramatically changed at one point, and so some of those they're just not as kind of a comprehensive type of a authority granting structure to model that this one was.
Any further questions for me? Go ahead, Mr. Coker.
So I guess I would have a few questions. We specifically mentioned beef processing plants, and yet all agriculture could be included in this bill, correct? Other processing facilities that aren't related to meat processing. I'm kind of, I can see why we did it, because that's what we were focusing on, but if this thing passes and we get to the floor, we may need to explain why we single out one particular part of agriculture. And so maybe you can help me along with this.
Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Eklund, it's true that this specifies meat processing projects. However, the last part of the bill draft, the ones for the cities and towns, those were talking about agriculture and agricultural related, industries. So it seems like, this is very narrow right now, but the committee quite easily could say agriculture processing projects or agricultural processing projects and that would be right there on page 2 in the purpose of the bonds. And that would still be pretty narrow. Is the committee's intent is not saying business council, you can do revenue bonds for anything. It still would be pretty narrow. Instead of meat processing, it would be agriculture processing, but still, that's if you look at these, the Small Business Administration types of industry classification codes, it still would only invoke a few of them.
Just to follow up, yeah, and it begins, the opening paragraph is what I looked at to be sure that the legislation fit what we're trying to do, because it's got include agricultural and agriculture related projects. So, and then it goes into detail later on in the bill, but
Mr.
anyway.
Chairman, yes, it'd be on line 3, page 1, that meat would turn to agriculture. And on page 2, line 13, that meat would turn to agriculture.
Okay.
And I think that those would be because those are the two places, the title of the whole bill itself, and then right there in the purpose of the bonds would be the two places that would broaden that, but not too much.
Thank you.
And so I guess I have a question just to be clear. We mentioned, or I mentioned at least that, you have to still go out and actually find a private entity to, for the financing. And so could you just describe some of the differences between this bill and the Energy Authority bill drafted? And when it comes to that, I believe that you described that the Energy Authority specifically says you can use public funds, that you use a permanent trust fund, for example, in that case, to invest in these bonds, and that is absent from this bill draft. And so I think that's a really, really important point, that we're not going to be using public funds to fund these bonds. And so it's important the committee understands that there's no provision in the bill, but the lack of that provision that exists in the other areas is what guarantees that you're going to go to get private funding. Is that correct?
Exactly, Mr. Chairman and committee. There is a specific, even though this authority was based on or modeled after the Energy Authority ability to issue bonds, there was one aspect that was not carried over, and that was a specific item in the Energy Authority that says that the state of Wyoming, I don't know if it says state of Wyoming or if the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund may invest in a project that is for which bonds are issued by the Energy Authority. And that's what enabled the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund to invest in one of those projects. But that is absent here. These would be private entities who would be going through the council to finance one of these projects. It's not that provision that allows the state or the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, I feel like I'm leaving an initial out there, but to invest is not included in this bill. It's intentionally, based on my understanding of the committee's intention, absent from this bill.
Okay, Thank you for that. Very important, I think, point that we're just taking advantage of a tax break from federal tax code. There's no public funds of the state that's ever going to be put at risk, but maybe that lower interest rate will entice some development. So any further questions, committee? Okay, well, thank you for the explanation of the legislation. Okay, so Business Council, why don't you come back up and provide any testimony you may wish on this bill draft.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, from our perspective, it's going to take a little bit of education. We've been doing a bit of research on it and trying to understand how to use them the best we can. And so it's going to take some time for us to understand all of the ins and outs of it. Our involvement so far with industrial revenue bonds has been on analyzing the business plans for the entities that are requesting that. And so we've done that a handful of times, and it truly is really just a handful, I think 3 or 4 times over the course of the last few years, the 5 years that Josh Keefe has been on our team. And so we're looking forward to understanding them a bit more. We know that there's going to be an education. We know that there's going to be a little bit more overhead to do that, but we'll dig in and try to understand that so that we can make sure that we're ready to use this tool if it comes to pass.
Any questions for the Business Council? And just to verify, I mean, this is something that is currently under the Business Council's purview. It basically you're, checking on in some form or another. There's a process where if a county government, for example, I keep on going back to the example of my neck of the woods in Commerce County, county commissioners approved a project. It was for a gas plant, I believe. Business Council looked at the business plan, didn't really, it's not as if, you have to approve it or deny it. You just kind of look it over and then it goes out to there's an opportunity for private investment. And that's kind of the fail safe there. If, you're still looking for a private investor, it's going to risk that capital to go ahead and fund the project. So I personally, I don't envision a whole lot of work going in from the Business Council. It's just an additional opportunity in addition to what already exists with the local government for a slightly bigger agricultural processing plant. And you're just simply, you're the conduit under federal tax law. So yeah, I certainly look forward to working with you and seeing what additional resources you may need to go ahead and implement this law. But just like to point out to me that you're already doing it in some form. And I imagine the involvement to be relatively minimal, but we'll see what exactly resources you might need to go ahead and do this slightly adjusted work here, so that you're already doing. So any questions for the Business Council? Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Do you already I'll have some sort of a methodology to help with private financing or bonding that gets passed on, or is that something you normally leave to the companies that are looking to do these sort of projects?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Clausen, our involvement right now in these is strictly limited to analyzing the business plan and providing feedback on the business plan. So the remaining portion of any of the bonding authority, that is outside of our current purview. However, when it comes to analyzing projects as a whole for our other programs such as BRC, while we may not be doing bonding, we are looking at the entire project as a whole. So I don't know if that really answers your question, because we don't do all of the ins and outs of industrial revenue bonds today. And it's not something that we do. However, we do that portion where we analyze the business plan and provide feedback for the entities that do that.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. So is just so we're clear on this, currently in a project, you would analyze their financials, their business plan, and if it moved forward and if it was a very large project that required bonding, or would someone was seeking to go through tax-free bond like this avenue, that wouldn't be through through the business council? They would take care of that through their own legal departments, or would you refer them to Community Development Authority, or you don't handle these sort of things and haven't seen one?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Clausen, I might have Josh Keefe help me out with that. He's been involved in some of these, some of them very recently, for the ins and outs of that. But again, we do not see it all the way through, I guess, is the ultimate answer today.
Chairman Boney, Representative Clausen, that's correct. So what happens at the moment, we'll say a business plan comes in. I poke holes in it. I give feedback back to the bonding agency. And so I'll give the example right now on a project with the Energy Authority. Gave feedback back to them from my perspective where I thought the holes were. They then continue to work with the entity seeking the bonding. And so what then would happen is we'll say they fill all the holes. What had happened next then is that basically it would have to go out to the market. And so we then would go out and find the private investors in the project. I think the project would have to get rated. When you put the bond out there, you'd have to rate the bond. And that all involves a lot of legal counsel and lawyers that really specialize in bond counsel. There are a handful in the state of Wyoming that are experts in that area. And so we would have to engage those experts out in the third party to really help structure and carry it across the finish line, if you will, so that the investment could be matched up with folks out there looking to invest in those types of projects.
Mr. Chairman, so currently through not just agriculture entities, but currently through, evidently you're working with the Energy Authority and other businesses. Do they seek out these tax-free bonds, or do they go to a more general bonding sort of a process in your experience? Or and give us kind of an example of how many of these we have going on, if it's one or if it's 50, or what the interest kind of is.
Chairman Boner, Representative Clausen, gosh, probably in a given year, I maybe see 2 of these come across my desk. And so there have not been many. When Josh referenced a handful, it truly has been a handful. And so I think it's not a very popular item, and they do typically just go after the tax-free structure where it's max project of $10 million, so that they can, reap the benefits of a tax-free bond and hopefully get a lower interest rate on the project side, and then a tax-free bond for the investors on the other side of the transaction.
Mr. Chairman, so why do, I guess I'm asking for your opinion because you're probably the most knowledgeable guy in the room, but why do we see so few of these? Do they usually go through this process another route? Is it not well known in business circles? Is it too cumbersome? Kind of what's the?
Chairman Boner, Representative Clausen, again, just my opinion here, I think a lot of it is it's intimidating for private entities to go through the process for this. I think they hear things like public hearings for county commissioners to sponsor the revenue bond. I think also it's just kind of the unknown for them. I think that maybe not intimidation as much as I think a lot of folks just don't know how it works. And I think that, and that's just not in the private sector. I think because there have been so few, it's tough to find experts who know how this works and who have the expertise to help get these projects done. So.
Mr. Chairman, so if we go down this road, and I think this is novel, but do you think it'll add some clarity to some of the other industries that are looking for some of this? If we set a clear process and set forward parameters for agriculture processing, do you think it'll maybe make it easier for other sorts of industrial stuff to go through this route so we can use this tool in the federal tax code? Because currently, from our other testimony, we're only using about half of it as a state. I think it's something we're really overlooking for all industry. Do you think it'll, I mean, with your experience, because you've actually handled some of these deals, do you think it'll make people more comfortable to go down this route? Maybe ease some of the concerns, or do you think the process is so cumbersome that we're not going to make it down this road? That's kind of, no, that's a big question.
Chairman Boner, Representative Clausen, I think it has the potential definitely to make it easier. It would provide a more clear path, if nothing else, for the staff of the Business Council to help educate and provide more ammunition in that consulting role that we are asked about so often. You know, a lot of times businesses will come to us and they'll say, hey, I really want to do this. Like what incentives, what financial tools are out there? And so I think that if we had this in our toolbox, as I've heard multiple times this morning, I think that that gives us another tool to advise them on. And this would help lay out a clear process that if they choose to go down that path, it's there for them. And hopefully it's fairly streamlined and easy to understand. But on top of that, I think that it would also help promote, I think, better projects coming forward that are more likely to be successful with the private financing and the private investment coming from the other direction as well. So I think overall it would help.
Okay, just had a quick question. You talked about engaging experts to, analyze these bonds. Is that something you currently do, or is that with the local governments, or is that something counties do? Once again, the intent of this bill is not to necessarily really have you, do anything terribly different from what you're already doing or is already happening in either state or local government. So it just a little bit more clarity on that discussion point of engaging with experts to, issue these bonds, and what experience is already available either at the Business Council or through county governments with the current structure.
Chairman Boner, committee, I think in regards to the experience the Business Council already has, I believe we're very good at analyzing the risk and helping structure these projects to where they can be successful. The part of the Business Council where we don't have the expertise is really in all of the legal tax code, making sure that the investment conforms with all of the federal tax code regulations. And that's where I had referenced the bond council. Those folks are the ones that really help make sure that they are conforming, because no investor would want to have, put their money into a project and then later find out that, oh, sorry, you're on the hook now for capital gains tax or whatever it might be on your investment. And so in regards to the staff at the Business Council, I think we have the expertise to do a lot of the front end work. But like I said, the kind of the second 2/3 of the 2/3 of the rest of the project to carry it across the finish line is really where we need that help from outside folks. So.
It just fall, because this is currently happening. You have, even though it's underutilized, there has been projects that have moved forward. So who's currently doing that analysis? Is it county government? I'm just trying to, it seems like, there's a disconnect here of, these things are currently happening, but yet the expertise somehow doesn't exist. Does that reside at the county level?
Chairman Boner, so as far as the expertise for the project side and reviewing the project on the front end before it goes out for public investment, that would be me. I think as far as, but then as far as outside, I've talked to 3 different lawyers. 2 of them reside here in Cheyenne that help issue those bonds. I know that one of them specifically helped with the Converse County issuance. And so that's those are the folks that we been interacting with.
And in that Commerce County instance, who paid for that expert? Was it the company? Was it the Commerce County government? Who paid for that expertise?
Chairman Boner, I don't know the answer to that question, sir.
Well, that'd be, I think as we develop this product, this idea, that's an important point that needs to be, discussed. Being from Commerce County, I could probably ask it just as easily, that question as easily as any of you for the county commissioners, but that is something, it seems to me maybe the project proponent would be on the hook for, making sure that they're all the i's are dotted and the t's are crossed, but that's something we could certainly find more about, and to make sure we're not putting undue burden on U.S. state agency when really what we're looking for is you to act as a conduit and really not, trying to minimize the amount of administrative effort that goes into these bonds. We're just looking for that opportunity to take advantage of federal tax code. So any further questions, committee? Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in your, I love these buzzwords that I don't usually use, but do we need some more continuity between, say, a bonds council, something like that? Do we need more expertise in this area to get these off the ground? Or I guess your opinion, why aren't we doing a bunch of them and why don't they work? If it seems like it's a good financial incentive, but where's the, we're just not quite there in making this.
Chairman Boner, Representative Clausen, just in my opinion, I think the reason that a lot of these have not been done, I think maybe not only part of it is maybe people don't know about it as much as they should, but I think the other part of it is, I think it really goes to the market side of things. Like you can put the project out there, but I think the real challenge is finding those investors to invest in that project. And I think that it kind of reminds me a little bit of kind of the venture capital world, where I think this is maybe not as risky as that, but it still is the same problem where people may only invest in certain industries that they know or that they feel comfortable in investing in. And so I think that getting the word out, but also the second half of that transaction is getting them to invest in the project in Wyoming. And then hopefully being able to provide them a good return on a project as well, because that's ultimately what they're trying to get from their end as well.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. We'll see how this bill goes. So any public testimony, if you're online, feel free to raise your hand. Not sure if we have any scheduled online testimony, but we'll be sure to take a look at that. And while that happens, we'll take public testimony in the room. So welcome back to the Ag Committee, Mr. Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Perhaps I'm reading this bill wrong, but it looks like pages 2 through 10 are specific to meat processing. And I don't know, I'm not smart enough to figure this out, but is there a way that we could apply 2 through 10 for agricultural processing rather than just meat processing? I mean, that was our dream, is that we could strengthen, look at the whole entire ag economy rather than just, the one segment of it. I don't know if that's possible, but I do appreciate this bill. Right now, buying local is big. It's growing. I think that's one thing that's came out throughout the pandemic, is that people even more so want to know where their food's coming from. And if possible, they want to buy something locally, and much more than just their meat. There's other products that we have that we could sell locally and get that supply chain shortened up, so it's going quicker from the producer to the consumer. So sitting in firm support of this bill. There is one thing on page 5. It looks, and this is just clerical, it looks like there's 2 little VIs. I know that's just a clerical thing, but even a blind pig can find an acorn once in a while, I guess, Mr. Chairman. But with that, sitting in support of this bill, I would sit for any questions the committee may have of me.
Well, thank you for that input. That's certainly something that with, it's an easy amendment that we can make, strike meat and insert agricultural. That's something that I identified in my review of the bill. I appreciate the clerical, the notice of the clerical error. I did not catch that
Well,
one. So any questions for the Farm Bureau Committee?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any further testimony, Mr. McGagnon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate your work on this initiative. This is something that we've looked at as one of the missing links in our ability to really move forward with meat processing in Wyoming on some mid-sized scales where it can provide benefit across our ranching community. So we would certainly encourage support for this. While our focus is on meat, understandably, we would have no objections if the committee should decide to expand it to agricultural products. We all benefit from all of those opportunities as they arise. And with that, would simply realize this is presents a new challenge in front of the Business Council. It's our belief that it's a challenge that they're well equipped to meet, and we would encourage you to move forward with this. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for the stock growers? Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate your support. Any further public testimony? Ms. Hendrickson, come on down.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members, Amy Hendrickson, the Wyoming Wool Growers Association. I would echo the comments of Mr. McGagna, but I also support the idea that this would be beyond meat processing. Obviously for the wool industry, that it'd be a really great thing as well for us. And so with that, and I also do recognize the challenges for the Business Council, but I echo what Mr. McGagna said, and I think they can address those things as well. So we would stand in support at this time.
Any questions for the wool growers? Okay, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? Do we have anybody online? No, okay. All right, so last chance for public comment. Go once, going twice. Public comment is closed. So committee, we have a bill draft before us. What's your pleasure? Moved by Senator Cost, second by Representative Heiner. Any discussion or amendments, committee? Representative Clausen?
So discussion and amendments, but before I propose the amendment, I think we're gonna have a little more work to do on this down the road, but I think it's headed in the right direction. I really do. I think we will have to work quite a little with the Business Council to get it tuned up, but I think we're headed down the right road, and we still have a lot of room in the process to add to it and make those tune-ups. But with that, I'll offer the amendment to change the meat processing portion to ag processing.
Okay, so moved and seconded committee to strike all references to meat processing and insert agricultural processing. So, I mean, we just heard about a mill in Torrington. We heard about wool processing. So just make it a little bit broader, not just meat. Is the committee okay with that? And I mean, we could go through page and line, but I think it's pretty straightforward conceptual amendment. Does everybody understand that? Okay, any discussion on the amendment? Representative Wharf.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I support the motion. I just have a question, and we've heard the Business Council say this is already kind of a new subject. I wonder if by removing it and opening it up to any agricultural processing, if it could in fact inundate them with a flood of demands. That's the only concern I have, and I throw that out for us to consider, but that's the only, I guess, in the back of my head, I have a reservation of opening the floodgates too quickly, and wonder if we wouldn't be better off to leave it at that. I mean, I do think it makes sense to make it applicable to any agricultural projects that would be available. But I just question if it's too broad, too quick. Be the only, I guess I want to make sure we've thought about that before we vote on that.
Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, I think I thought about that same thing too, but we're gonna have quite a little more work to do on this bill. Before it's not gonna be in this exact form by the way it hits the floor. So if we find that that's the case, I think it'll be pretty easy to narrow it back down.
Chairman Eklund.
So I think it would reduce the size of the bill if we went with ag processing. I think that if we don't pass this amendment, we'll accomplish the same thing because the title includes other ag processing, and then later on, when it goes into the projects, it keeps it open to all of agriculture, ag-related agriculture. So I think it'd be easier to read as just ag processing than to go through and then wonder if it's just beef processing, which it isn't.
Any further discussion on the amendment committee? And yeah, just like to say, I mean, I think we'll be okay given the challenge right now is that we're not utilizing this at all. I think it's gonna, and I don't have any specific project in mind, just to be clear. I think this will be a tool that might sit on the shelf for a while. So I guess recognize the concerns and but I just don't, given the evidence we have right now, I'm not sure if that's if anything, this could be sold to our colleagues as a pilot project for maybe opening up to any sort of industrial, development. So I'm comfortable with the amendment, but certainly we need to see how it goes, and we can make adjustments at a later time. So on and for the amendment. So any further discussion, committee? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Okay, that amendment passes. Any further discussion on the bill, committee? Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we need to have a correction on an amendment to correct the Romanets, or can we just make sure that that's taken care of? I mean, it seems like, sure, make it.
Okay, so a motion and a second to change the clerical error on page 5, line 6, and make it corresponding amendments to just make it look pretty. Okay. So any discussion on that?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Wasberger.
Mr. Chairman, I would oppose your last comment. It's very hard to make bills pretty.
Voice of experience there from Senator Wasberger. Okay, but you know what I meant. Okay, Heather, you raise your hand or?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cost, we would fix it regardless, but that's great if the committee wants this to be voted. Yeah.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Okay. Co-Chairman Eklund.
Okay, so we discussed it real briefly when Heather went over the bill. Page 2, line 15, which bonds shall not exceed in the aggregate an amount of $50 million. And I think when we discussed it at our last meeting, we were talking per project, $50 million per project. There's quite a bit more available than the 50 million. I don't anticipate we'll ever get to the 50 million, but I guess I'd hate to limit it down and then we get into a project that would really work in Wyoming. Or that would be the problem. Get 2 projects, both of them cost quite a bit, and we exceed that 50 million in aggregate. So I guess I would propose an amendment that we strike in the aggregate and put per project, an amount of $50 million. That would be my motion.
Is there a second? Okay, moved by Co-Chairman Eklund, second by Senator Cost. I guess just discussion, that was my intent. It's supposed to be $50 million per project. The idea being that that's corresponds with the other provisions in the bill that limits it to a no larger than a mid-sized plant. Meat processing plant is kind of what we're thinking about. We'll want that cap in there to ensure we don't kind of double down on the failures of these large corporations to really provide consistent processing capacity for our producers and our consumers. So on the support of the amendment and recognizing that, we're still have $150 million excess capacity every year on average in the state. So any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. That motion carries. Any further discussion on the bill, committee? Discussion or amendments? Okay, question being called. We'll go and do a roll call.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 22 LSO 45 revenue bonds for agricultural endeavors for committee sponsorship. Senator Bouchard. Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Cost.
Aye.
Senator Wasserberger.
Aye.
Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen. Representative Fortner. Representative Heiner. Representative Larson. Representative Western. Representative Wharf. Representative Winter. Representative Winter.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Eklund. Chairman Boner. Representative Western. Twelve ayes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, well, thank you. Everybody will continue discussing this with the business council. And once again, not to be a dead horse, but we'll give you a little tool in the toolbox to help you out as we continue to harp on you to, do more ag-related value added projects. So thanks for your work so far. We look forward to working with you moving forward. So right now we have a discussion of a select committee bill dealing with livestock infectious diseases. Looks like we have Senator Affy Ellis with us here today. Maybe Representative Larson. So I always recognize our colleagues when they pop into the room. Senator, thanks for being with us. And just because you weren't in the room when we made the announcement, we're going to break at 11 o'clock to go up and see one of our new colleagues get sworn in the House chamber. But we have half an hour before then, so we'll just go ahead and press through for another about 25 minutes. If you want to give us an overview, we'll get as far as we can on this last agenda item. So welcome to Ag Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am here to provide some backup to my co-chairman, Representative Larson, who has worked a lot on this bill. So just here to offer moral support or clarification if needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Larson, welcome to the Ag Committee, at least digitally. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. And I appreciate Senator Ellis. She is a great co-chairman and keeps me calm and settled. I appreciate her. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, we requested that this bill be brought before your committee to just bring you up to speed on what we're trying to do, as we assumed during the budget session, if this comes forward, that it would come to your committee, be referred to your committee, and thought that it would be good for you to understand what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And so if I may, I'd just like to give you a little history on why the bill was being drafted in the first place. It's important for the committee to kind of understand that civil law on the reservation is really administered through the Tribal Law and Order Code, which was granted to them by power through Congress to let the tribes kind of have self-determination for their civil laws. And so the state doesn't have jurisdiction to enforce some of the laws that we have around the rest of the state on the reservation. Those civil issues are handled by tribal law and tribal fish and game officials. For example, the game and fish, the state game and fish has no jurisdiction for wildlife laws on tribal land. That's handled by their tribal fish and game. We don't have brand inspectors have no jurisdiction on the reservation. And pertinent to this case, the state veterinarian doesn't have authority to exercise the requirements that she has under statute. In the state veterinarian and the livestock board have for some time been concerned about how to prevent the spread of contagious or infectious disease that may be transmitted from wildlife to our livestock, and particularly we're most familiar with brucellosis, and not really having the ability to work with livestock producers on the reservation to ensure that those being able to quarantine or do other observations of that wildlife. And so our livestock board director, True, and Dr. Hadsel met with the governor's office, and the governor's office in some of their quarterly meetings with the two tribes on the reservation, the Eastern Shoshone Tribal Council and the Northern Arapaho Tribal Council, brought the subject up. And in that discussion on how to implement maybe some of these programs, the question was asked by Councilman Fasthorse of the Northern Arapaho Tribe if the reimbursement programs administered by the state veterinarian are if livestock producers on the reservation are eligible for that. And then in researching that, we found out that they were not. And so we kind of moved forward here trying to see how we could allow these the control of infectious disease on the reservation, and at the same time make these programs available to livestock producers on the reservation. And with that said, Mr. Chairman, I will tell you that if you're a livestock producer on the reservation and you have a Bureau of Indian Affairs lease, that lease, a grazing lease, it would require you to comply with all state laws. But if you were a livestock producer that solely had private ground, you would not have to comply with any of those requirements of the state veterinarian. And so in the conversations, we considered, do we need to, is there some way that we could have a memorandum of understanding with the two tribes and maybe have one of their tribal agencies administer the program? And the question really come back is, what are you implying here? Are you saying that we have a problem with the transmittal of contagious or infectious disease from wildlife to livestock on the reservation? And if that is the implication, the two councils step back and says, we're not sure that we would agree with that. And but yet, we don't necessarily disagree. If a livestock producer wants to participate in the program, we would certainly like them to be eligible for any of the reimbursement programs if they did. And so we kind of started taking a parallel track and bifurcated the issue. And one is there a problem with transmission of infectious disease from wildlife to livestock? And that the answer to that will come through additional testing through tribal efforts and the Fish and Wildlife Service, which helps them to do that. Once that data comes in, and if they deem that there is indeed a problem, then they may wish to engage with the memorandum of understanding to administer these programs. But until then, we took a different kind of a different approach, which allows the state veterinarian, Dr. Hadsel, to reach out to livestock producers on the reservation. And if they're willing to comply with the conditions of the program requirements, then they would be eligible for the reimbursing and testing programs. And so that's, we thought that that was a great step forward in trying to at least get more livestock producers on the reservation who aren't currently required to participate, an incentive to participate. And so in this bill, what we do is go into 1119-101, which is the duties of the state veterinarian, and we give her the authority to, if you look at the bill, to provide contagious and infectious reportable disease testing, containment, and reimbursement services to any livestock producer in Wyoming, including on the Wind River Reservation, who agrees in writing to comply with the applicable program requirements, rules, and any orders issued pursuant to the testing results. And feel that this will, Mr. Chairman and co-chairman and members of the committee, this will put into place the ability for the state veterinarian to further engage with livestock producers to control contagious and infectious disease. And it will also allow those producers on the reservation to be eligible for some of the programs for reimbursement. And then we go into the programs in put in the wording that make producers on the reservation eligible. And so, Mr. Chairman, that's really the essence of the bill, and hopefully the history makes sense to the committee on why we're doing this, and would be happy to answer any questions. And then I'm sure we've got Director True and Dr. Hadsel here. They can clean up any mess that I've created here.
Thank you. Any questions for Chairman Larson? Yeah, well, I have one on the bill draft page, or the bill, page 3, line 21. It has a reference, new language to tribes of the regions adjacent to Wyoming. Just a little, I apologize if I missed the explanation. Just it seems like that's, I don't understand why that's in the bill. If you could just give a little bit more explanation as to why that language is in there.
Well, that was a pickup that we had, that in order, as we work to do the brucellosis free status, the governor shall enter into negotiations with any relevant parties, including the federal, but we have, and particularly on the western side of the state, where, and the northern side of the state, where we have tribal entities and reservations that potentially would have livestock and wildlife from their reservations that would cross over into Wyoming and impact transmittal of a contagious and infectious disease, that we're reaching out to those as well to hopefully mitigate any impacts.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. So slightly, I guess, different provision from the main objective of the bill and providing reimbursement. We're not going to be providing reimbursement to any tribes outside the state of Wyoming. Is that correct? Okay, thank you for that clarification. Co-chairman Eklund.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, so within Wyoming, we have brucellosis areas, and then we have surveillance areas. The surveillance area is between the Wind River Mountains and the Bighorns, and we just kind of watch those. Oh, you've got, I don't think I've got that in my folder.
No,
Maybe okay.
I'm greedy and didn't share that with you.
Okay. This legislation wouldn't bring the reservation into what would be part of the surveillance area, correct?
You're correct, Chairman, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Eklund. You're correct with that. And that really goes back to the point that we talked about in making further determination on if there is indeed a problem of transmittal of disease from wildlife to livestock within the boundaries of the reservation. As Director True may share with you, there were, I think, 3 or 4 elk in the last few years that have been identified as being hot with brucellosis, but the until there's further indication of that, that will not be included. And Director True can correct me if I'm wrong.
Any further questions, committee, for the chairman? Okay, thank you, sir, for being with us. Thanks for presenting this bill and this work on this bill draft. With that being said, if there's no further questions, we'll go ahead and bring Livestock Board up and provide their testimony.
Mr. Chairman, I do have the designated surveillance area map and a map of where the 3 collared elk were found. I'll start those here with Representative Wolf for the committee. Mr. Chairman, Committee, Steve True, Director of the Livestock Board with State Veterinarian, Dr. Hallie Hazel, and again, our Board President, Sean Sims. I want to just quickly say this has been a project through many years of Dr. Logan's term as state veterinarian and certainly my full 7 years. And Dr. Hazel has just moved into this process. And I want to thank in this forum, the governor's office and the chairman, both chairman of the Select Tribal and Representative Blackburn, who's on that committee as well, who have helped work with us in this project as we try and get somewhere. I think Representative Larson did a wonderful job of explaining a lot of the history in the bill right there. Two real to the nexus of it, I think there's 2 things that have supplied this. One is over time, and in 2017, the map that shows the 3 elk that were collared that were tested seropositive, they were collared during part of a study, joint study between the University, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the Tribal Fish and Wildlife on migration of mule deer. But they went ahead and captured, I believe, about 75 elk at that time over 2 years and did the full brucellosis testing. These 3 cow elk were seropositive for the disease at that time. That raised our interest in what is the actual seroprevalence rate on the reservation. And we've been requesting through the Select Tribal that maybe we could get some more testing done with that. And along with that, Dr. Hazel was apropos in prodding me to say, so if we find seroprevalence, what do we do about it? And that kind of fostered these conversations with Select Tribal and the governor. And it's probably a lot of the impetus behind one of the 2 main impetuses behind this bill. The second would be, as the good chairman of Select Tribal related to you, is you'll remember maybe 2 sessions ago, a bill was passed that expanded our brucellosis. We have an indemnity fund that covers 3 reportable diseases, tuberculosis, scrapie, and brucellosis. That was a one-time appropriation back in 2011. That's there, that if you have a brucellosis cow that tests as a reactor, she has to be necropsied to make that result final. And that's as far in the science as I'm going to go. Dr. Hazel will catch the rest of that. But there is a fund there that helps indemnify that owner for the value of that animal. A couple of years ago, Representative Summers brought to you a bill that added an reimbursement for quarantine mitigation for up to $25,000 per producer for brucellosis mitigation. If a quarantine that is imposed through somebody out of their normal business model and they accrued unusual expenses, here was a piece of that indemnity fund they could apply for. So that both of those, as the chairman discussed, it appears are not available to our Wyoming producers who reside on the reservation. Quickly, and Chairman Sims and both Dr. Hazel will probably echo me in this, in that a Wyoming producer to us is a Wyoming producer, whether they're on the sovereign nation or not. So this is, I believe, an outstanding attempt to give those folks the same ability to access those accounts if they comply with the requirements that Dr. Hazel can place on any other producer in the state. That's kind of a quick and 20,000 foot view of the background of this. If you have any questions, particularly any scientific questions, Dr. Hazel will take all of those, and I probably delved too far in that already for my expertise.
Okay, any questions, Representative Lawson?
Mr. Chairman, Director, so currently would APHIS be over this or some federal agency, or is there nobody?
Mr. Chairman, on a jurisdictional issue, as the Chairman Larson said, we don't have jurisdiction for brand inspections or this animal health. But if they are on a BIA allotment grazing agreement, then it says that person shall comply with state regulations, laws, and rules. Same, the BLM has the same clause, Forest Service has the same clause. So that's there, but as he said, some of that ground that's grazed is not under their allotment process. So as far as who has the presiding level, and I might kick that one to Dr. Hazel, because we don't. The BIA has some and the tribal councils have some. So.
And I think the question was, is there a similar program to what you do for brucellosis at federal level? Just does that exist or doesn't it? That is available already to the producers on the reservation.
Chairman, and co-chairs, as explained previously, excuse me, the programs that we have pertain to the producers of Wyoming. With regards to a disease status, regardless of whether they're a Wyoming citizen or a citizen of the sovereign status, the disease is recognized as coming from Wyoming. When you ask about the USDA's federal regulations regarding brucellosis, yes, they do have federal regulations, but due to sovereign status of the nations, they don't necessarily fall under all of those federal regulations either. But USDA does regulate commerce. So animals entering commerce must be free of disease. So they do control it from that standpoint, but as far as on the nation itself, they may not apply to that either. There are some gray areas in that.
So I think I'm understanding the bill. Presently, this is real interesting because I didn't understand that the reservation would have separate rules from the rest of the state or benefits that the other producers have. So under the present scenario, if they were to test beef animals suspected they had brucellosis, they tested the animals, found out that they did, that producer would have to pay for all of the testing and wouldn't be reimbursed for livestock that they had to destroy because of what they found. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes, basically, yes, they're not eligible at this point. It's been determined they're not eligible for the indemnity reimbursement funds. As far as testing, I'll let Dr. Hazel talk to that part of it, but I do want to answer your previous question that you asked Representative Larson. No, the designated surveillance area, which is on that map, is all outside but surrounds a pretty good share of the reservation. That's where the governor and the board over years ago established that area as a brucellosis area for surveillance. We did have a brucellosis area of concern in Bighorn and Sheridan County. That has been repealed due to many years of no positive tests through the game and fish testing on their hunt areas. 2 years ago, I believe the board, or a year ago, the board repealed that and the governor signed off on it after review. So there is now only the designated surveillance area. No areas of concern. Either of those are done in conjunction on the state veterinarians and USDA's recommendation, but that designation is done by the board and the governor.
Okay, committee, at this point, I think we need to take a break to go up to see our new colleague get sworn in. So sorry to interrupt the good discussion that's going on, but there's a hard time frame that we have to deal with here. So we'll go ahead and break from this committee meeting, come back at 11:30, continue this discussion and wrap up our business for the interim, and we can get everybody on the road before it's time to eat lunch. So thanks for your participation. Look forward to continuing the discussion in about half an hour. Okay, we'll go ahead and get going again. It's a little bit before 11:30, but I think we'll be okay here. So sorry to interrupt that good conversation we're having on this bill draft from Select Tribal Relations Committee, but also important to support our new colleague who's going to be thrown very much into the fire here next week. So we were discussing this bill draft. So any further comments, I guess, Director, to get us going again?
Mr. Chairman, real quick, there was a question that I answered part of, and there's a portion of that that has to do with testing on the reservation. I'd like Dr. Hazel to make that reply, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, committee. There was a question regarding indemnity funding and how do we pay, who pays, who's eligible, et cetera. We can still pay the veterinarian to do the testing just like we do for any producer in the state of Wyoming. We will reimburse that veterinarian per our regulations. And we will also pay for the actual brucellosis testing on the reservation. That is separate and apart from indemnity funding. So we can cover their cost of the brucellosis test and we can reimburse the veterinarian for doing that, but we can't offer the indemnity or mitigation funds to the producers should they become positive. Okay.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any further questions, committee?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'd just like to say if the bill's introduced and your committee gets it, we are available wherever. It's a pretty in-depth kind of a subject, and we'll be available for whatever information you need.
Okay, appreciate it. And as far as you can tell right now, the bill draft's good shape. It's workable. You have no technical amendments or anything like that, or?
Mr. Chairman, too early in the process. We'll wait and see when it lands in your court and have those conversations. If there's anything then or any changes then that we think need to be addressed. But we are in support of the concept, and we certainly appreciate the great help we got from Select Tribal.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your work, the work of the Select Committee on this issue. Is there any public comment? We'll go ahead and open up to public comment. Once again, if you're online, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll get to you. But for now, we'll go ahead and open up to any comment you might have in the room. Okay. Ms. Merlin gave us 2 thumbs up, so that's good to know for the record. So anybody online?
Mr. Chairman, we have Araya Parsons online.
Okay. Rhea, go ahead and turn your video on and unmute yourself. And if you have any comment on this topic, now's the time to do so.
Hi, good afternoon or good morning, I should say. My name is Rhea Parsons. I am with the Wyoming Prevention Action Alliance. We are a statewide prevention coalition under the umbrella of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. I appreciate you giving me just a quick moment of your time. I won't take very long. I understand that there are not agenda items within your committee as of right now. Specifically related to what we do, but I know that there has been a lot of conversation over the last couple of years around CBD and hemp. And so I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what we do so that if ever we can potentially be a resource for you, we would be happy to do that. You have probably received emails from me.
As I appreciate it, we'll get to your testimony in a minute, and but we're on an agenda item that we have scheduled now, but we'll open up to public comment in a few minutes. So hang tight. We'll finish up this topic we have with the bill draft in front of us, and we'll get to you in just a minute. But I'm glad you're here, and yeah, we'll just finish up the current topic, then we'll have the general public comment. So Representative Larson, you have your hand up too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I just would express a little surprise at Director True's comments that it's too early in the process to determine if he has any further additions to that. He's been navigating this from the get-go, and so if there's, I would be surprised if there were any other comments. I thought this bill was pretty well worked through from their position. So I'm a little taken back by that and not quite sure how to respond. I thought we come out of tribal relations with a clean bill that would be able to come before you. And so I'll get with Director True and try to figure out what what he meant by that, and we'll be ready by the time we come to the committee meeting, because it's had a lot of work on it.
Yeah, thanks for those comments, Mr. Chairman. You certainly have a good experience on your select committee, and expect the bill to be squared away. Absolutely. But yeah, I'm just doing our due diligence and look forward to a good bill draft once it gets to the session. So. Okay, any further public comment on this topic? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close that topic for now. So now we have general public comment. Okay, thank you for your patience, Ms. Parsons. The floor is yours.
I apologize for getting in there on the wrong moment. Again, my name is Rhea Parsons. I'm with the Wyoming Prevention Action Alliance. We are a statewide prevention coalition that connects prevention resources across Wyoming, as well as helps to mobilize prevention efforts. Our topics that we focus on are alcohol, tobacco and vaping, marijuana, meth and other drugs, and of course, we also work with youth. We have been helping to assist in education around hemp and CBD over the last couple of years, and you probably have received either an email from me or snail mail at some point or another. But again, I understand that CBD and hemp are not on your topics right at the moment, so don't want to take a lot of your time. Just wanted to let you know we're here. We're under the umbrella of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police, so I know you all know how to reach out to Byron as well. But we're here if we can ever assist with education or resources.
Yeah, thank you for that testimony. Thanks for your availability. Committee, any questions? Okay, once again, thanks for your participation in this committee meeting. I'll also point out that we do have a judiciary committee that is going to be also well-versed in these sorts of topics. So there's a little bit of intersection here with a particular type of agricultural product, I guess you could say. So appreciate you making yourself available to us, and certainly we'll do our best to make any adjustments based off of previous legislation where we may have I think in this area, I've hopefully stated before, we may have made some decisions we didn't really understand the consequences of those decisions. So appreciate your feedback.
And we understand the complexity of it. And once again, which is why we want to make ourselves available. So no problem. Thank you.
Okay, any further public comment before we wrap things up for the interim for the Joint Agriculture Committee? Okay, seeing none, just a few housekeeping items. We do have to decide which bills we're going to assign to which chamber. After discussing this with our co-chairman, and believe that we're going to just go ahead and make that decision once we have a chance to kind of assess the benefits, drawbacks of any particular bill assignment. But we want to leave that discussion open to the committee. If anybody has any input, any strong opinions about which of that, I believe we have 7 bill drafts, if that's correct. That we'll be introducing to the budget session. If we have a strong opinion about which chamber that should be introduced in, now's the time to have that discussion. Okay, well, we'll do our best. We'll see what happens. Oh yeah, we'll see how it goes. But okay. Okay, we'll see what happens. So any further discussion, committee, before we adjourn? Next time we'll see each other is probably going to be the budget session. So, or as a committee, as the agriculture committee. That's what I meant. So, okay, we're adjourned. And don't forget to do your paperwork, get to the chairman. Be sure to do that. All right, see you in a little bit.